20 people here tonight. Really good crowd. Alrighty. Alrighty then. Tonight's story is brought to you in part by dpwr.net for the Disney dates, uruarchives.com for the surface history corresponding to the Disney dates, and the Converting Calendar Converter, which was written by Brett Middleton of the Fuzzy Physics Institute for converting between Disney and surface time. Tonight's story is from Mist, the Book of Tiana. Also, as a side note, this is story number 45 of 104. So we're coming up in the halfway point through the story arc. Also, for those of you who might be interested, if you can't make it to a story night, I've been recording these stories and posting them up on my YouTube channel, which is basically my avatar name sans the apostrophe. Alright, and now it's time for the story. As we progress through the stories of the kings, we've seen many changes in the Dini culture. We've seen an austere lifestyle that began with King Rinaref, supplanted by greed and avarice that began with King Shomat. We saw a devotion to Yavo and a single faith, supplanted by diverse religions and religious beliefs numbering over 2,000, diminishing to just a handful by the end of King Kera's reign. Because of the writings of a martyred, self-proclaimed prophet named Gish, we saw their belief system being hijacked and steered away from the words and teachings of Yavo. In fact, with King Jaran, who was Kerith's grandfather, we saw how the classes had become the most divided ever in their entire history. Yet the more violent factions in Dini decided to follow Yavo more closely and hope for a peaceful solution to their differing point of view. Gish's writings resulted in a conservative culture within Dini society, a culture that held the Arotanti, or outsiders, with great disdain and contempt. This general attitude among the Dini was another contributing factor in the demise of a once great empire. We looked at the Mi-Dis War, which occurred during the early 8th millennium of Dini history. It was a war that was, once again, started by violent factions who were vehemently against contact with the Arotanti. This prejudice, though not held with the same violent emotions, still was felt by the majority of Dini society, a society that was very ethnocentric as well as xenophobic, and these feelings and opinions remained prevalent up to the fall. We learned about the origins of Yisha's journey ages, who created them and why. We learned about Agaris, the architect of the fall. His motives were not ethnocentric, nor did they stem from xenophobia. He was driven strictly by revenge. Revenge for being wrongly accused and convicted of a crime he did not commit. Revenge that drove him to commit genocide against his own people, a character flaw that would spell the end of an empire. Also, there were the beginnings of Atris, one of the heroes of the fall, the excavation of the great shaft, and of a friendship with Viovis, who would become one of the villains of the fall. We learned about a surface dweller named Anna, her life, and how she came to find the cavern, and those same old Denis fears of the Yarratanti, and their possibly corrupting influence on the Denis populace. We learned of Anna's time in prison, her learning the Denis language, and of Viova's anger which started to burn brightly against her over his beliefs in Denis elitism and supremacy over all other races. We learned of her trial and of her uncertain future, whether she should be sent to a prison age or allowed to live out the rest of her life in Denis without being allowed to go back to the surface. And we learned how Anna came to live with Atrus's parents, and how Viovis, through his arrogance, assumed that Anna would not come to his first book celebration. We learned how Atrus took exception to his friend's snubbing of Anna, and in turn snubbed his friend for making him choose between the two, and, finally, deciding to write an age with Anna. How, after living and working together, they fell in love, and how that love alienated Viovis, causing his anger to burn brighter than ever. We saw Atrus ask for Anna's hand in marriage. Needing Viovis's approval to get the full council's approval, Atrus had to remind Viovis of the latter's promise to grant any wish from his life being saved during the construction of the great shaft, bringing an end to their friendship. Last time we learned about the origins of the Watcher Sanctuary, how Guildmaster Kadish purchased the sanctuary and Urkana, and built Annone in order to perpetuate the lie that he was the grower, as he fancied himself to be. Tonight we will learn about the birth of a sickly child, a master forger, and a philosopher. Though it only took a few months for Atrus and Anna to write their Age of Gamadet, they spent several years writing the Book of Commentary. They observed the geological formations and compared them to what was written in the Korman, the descriptive book. After working closely together for about 3 years, they grew very close. Eventually, around the Denis year of 9377, approximately 1721 AD in the surface, Atrus asked her to marry him, to be his partner in all things, his helpmate and companion, to be by his side always, in whatever he would do. Calling in his marker from Viovis, for saving Viovis's life some 30 years earlier, Atrus got Viovis to rescind his objection to the marriage. Though we don't know the exact date of their marriage, we can assume that it was shortly afterwards, and held in the Denis tradition. A couple of years later, Atrus returned to his position on the council. Eventually, he established himself as the unofficial leader of the more liberal faction of the council, and was often consulted by the 5 lords on matters of policy. On one particular occasion, a proposal was brought before the council on improving the lot of the people of the lower city. They were Denis citizens, yet because they were poor, their lot in life was hard. Anna visited there quite often, noting the conditions and bringing it to the attention of Atrus and his friends and colleagues. The proposal before the council was basically written by her. Viovis, on the other hand, being the stodgy conservative that he was vehemently against it. He feared that the burden of power was too much for the lowly poor, and said so during the council's debate over this matter. To everyone's surprise, Atrus agreed with him, then clarified that the proposal was not about sharing the burden of power with the lower city, but was about improving their lot in life. The vote on the proposal was 182 for and 180 against. As was the law in matters where the difference between votes was 3 or less, the 5 lords cast their vote, deciding the matter. The 5 voted for the proposal. Having carried the day, Atris was in a very good mood. He really wasn't worried about losing his argument. As Anna had often said, "There's more than one way to skin a Riku." His friends in the council were surprised that he could remain so focused on the matter at hand, as Anna was about to give birth. By the time he returned home, she had already given birth to a son. This was a very good day indeed for him. They decided to name their son after Atris's grandfather, the father of Callas. And so, in the Deni year of 93-92, approximately 1736 A.D. on the surface, about 4 years after Handel wrote his oratorio, The Messiah, Gen, son of Atris and Anna, was born. Meanwhile, Viovis was in a very dark and brooding mood as a result of his defeat in the council. His pride and unwillingness to consider that he might be wrong blinded him to the possible validity of the other side's argument. In his mind, those that disagreed with him, on any matter regarding Denis, were too stupid to see the truth as he saw it. Too stupid, or harbored ill will towards Denis itself. It was at this time that Viova's friend Souvenir mentioned a fellow who referred to himself as the philosopher. This philosopher lived in the lower city and was, apparently, very influential among the lower classes, more so than Tiana and the reformers, so Cyrano said. Viovis roared with laughter when he found out that the philosopher was none other than the former guildsman Agarus. Souvenir countered that he was very influential among those of the lower city and had no love for outsiders, and considered people of mixed Denis blood an abomination. Though his mood was too dark to consider anything besides his defeat in the council chambers, as he shortly afterwards left for his home on Kavir to brood, Souvenir had planted a seed. Back in Atris's home, Master Oren of the Guild of Messengers was late to the celebration of Gen's birth at Atris' house that night. Rather than coming to help celebrate a joyous event, he came to tell Atris that they were called to a meeting that night. 2 young guildsmen from the Guild of Maintainers were missing. It was suspected that they were either kidnapped or killed, and the Guild of Maintainers needed help in searching the ages that the 2 missing men were investigating. About 60 in all. To make matters worse, the 2 were carrying blank descriptive books in order to document proof found in their search. This was a most grave circumstance. All families who owned Cormanti, descriptive books, were expected to surrender them for inspection. Lord Ricardi, Viovis's father, specifically asked for Atris's team to inspect his family's ages. When Viovis came home, he was livid, accusing Atris of positioning himself to inspect the family's ages on purpose in order to meddle. Lord Ricardi had to command his son into leaving the family bookroom. 2 days after Atrus's inspection was complete, Viovis read his report, commenting to his friend Suenir that the report was scrupulously fair. It is at this point that it becomes clear to the outside observer that Suenir was the first puppet that Egaris had recruited. Suenir began to plant seeds of doubt about Atrus, saying that he might have given a different report to one of the 5. Viovis was reluctant to believe such duplicity existed in Atrus. Suenir, saying that Egaris hears things, convinced Viovis to meet with him, and a clandestine meeting was arranged. It was around this time that little Gen became very sick. Master Jura of the Guild of Healers was with him. Jura was making notes, but little else. When asked what was wrong with the child, he told Anna that he wasn't getting enough nourishment, and that Gen was in pain. He went on to say that had he been full Denis, it would have been fairly easy to remedy. But because he was only half Denis, Jura refused to do anything but study the child's condition. When Anna asked him what his being half Denis had to do with anything, the master acted as if Gen were some type of experiment. He went on to say that one cannot mix human and Denis blood, and that it was amazing that the boy was even viable. To add insult to injury, he added that Gen would be better off dead. That was too much for Anna. Enraged at his arrogance, she yelled at him to get out and told the nurse to leave as well. When Viovis finally met with Egaris, he was still skeptical about what he might be able to do. Egaris mentioned that he had heard about Anna throwing the good doctor out of her house, which helped to verify Suenir's claim that the philosopher hears things. Egaris also said that there is one thing that he and Viovis share, and that is a love of Denis and the belief that Denis blood should remain pure. Later that night, in his library that was filled with books and journals, Egaris told his mute servant, Corlam, that what he really needed was Cortinia, blank books. For 50 years Egaris had labored here in this room, ever since his dismissal from the guild. He had spent his time plotting for his return from obscurity. Everyone would know his name, not just the malcontents of the lower city. To this end, he hoped that Lord Viovis could be persuaded to help. What Egaris did not tell his servant was that he would not be satisfied with emerging from obscurity, not even with notoriety. What he really wanted was infamy. To this end, he also devised a plan to get somewhere he was not allowed to be, and how to escape. He already had a mole in the person of Suenir to get him into restricted areas, for Korvakti, the linking books, have to be written in the place to where they will be linking. Now he needed to be able to persuade Lord Viovis to get him some blank books. The skill that Egaris had learned during all those years living in the lower city was how to copy another's handwriting. By this point, he only had to study someone's handwriting for an hour before he could copy it masterfully. Among all those books and records were records from the council penned by none other than Viovis. That night, he set about writing something in Viovis's style. It was at this time that he began to set a trap. Please join us next week as we learn about the accusation of a possibly innocent man and yet another missing maintainer. The end. Thanks, JT and Dr. Chris. Thanks, B3. You're welcome, Caver. Welcome, Kiwi and Potru and Cave Woman. Welcome, Honora and Chris.
I'm so glad to be here today.
And welcome, Mellis. I haven't seen you at Story Night for a little bit. And thank you all for coming tonight.
Yeah, glad I could make it tonight, especially given how I've got my hands full of college again.
Alright, and I'm going to end the video right